Rumors had been spreading for weeks in Utqiagvik, Alaska, about a low hum that woke people at night. Locals called it the undersound. Dogs howled, fishers swore their compasses jittered. The town's radio operators logged interference on 121.5 megahertz. Witnesses described a voice on the wind that sounded like their own names. Local reports at the time stated the noise seemed tied to the old radar array on Point Barrow and a series of ionospheric tests coming out of Kokona. Officials never explained the coincidence. Evelyn Hart was a community nurse. She kept a ledger of missing patients. She remembered the nights first. Patients complained of a pressure behind the eyes. They walked as if the ground had shifted. One man left his shack with his boots still on, sealing the door with twine. Another sat on his stoop and stared at the horizon until the sun moved, and he did not speak again. Witnesses said doors were left open, meals half eaten, clothing lay like folded paper. Records recovered years later show the morning of October 12, 1999. A HARP facility in Gakona performed an enhanced heating sequence described in a Navy memo as non-standard waveform patterning. The memo was redacted. The Anchorage Daily News noted increased auroral activity that night. The FBI logged an anonymous complaint about voices in the sky. Residents filed sworn statements. Sheriff Mark Johnson ran patrols for a week. He reported footprints leading away from town and then stopping. Cameras captured only snow. Neither the Department of Defense nor FEMA offered a public explanation. By then, the stakes were clear. People were vanishing. Half the town's 63 residents were gone within 10 days. The Coast Guard searched the shoreline. Helicopters found nothing but sled tracks fading into white. Survivors described waking in the tundra with hours missing. A teacher reported a class of sixth graders had stared at the ceiling for an hour and then walked to the bay barefoot. Local reports at the time stated sensing loss of time was common. Officials never explained the pattern. Scientists later called what happened a plausible coupling between low-frequency electromagnetic fields, infrasound resonances trapped in temperature inversion layers, and the microwave auditory effect. Dr. Samuel Klein, a visiting neurologist from Boston, concluded the stimuli could hijack vestibular function and auditory cortex simultaneously. His notes, obtained under a Freedom of Information request, described induced navigational dissociation and compromised episodic memory. That language appears in an internal Health and Human Services memo. Witnesses described voices telling them to follow. Some obeyed. Local audio recordings, handheld cassette tapes, VCR footage were analyzed by independent engineers. They show a carrier at 5.8 hertz, layered with brief, phase-shifted chirps. The recordings are quiet where a voice should be. When engineers filtered the signal, what remained was a pattern that, when played back at reduced speed, produced a familiar cadence. People who listened said it sounded like their childhood street. The tapes were logged and then, according to a museum catalog entry, misplaced. Officials never explained why the originals disappeared. Years later, the empty houses in Utqiagvik stand like ships aground. Chairs are still against tables. A child's mitten hangs from a nail. New families came and left. The radar array at Point Barrow was decommissioned and then quietly repurposed for Arctic navigation surveys. Investigations closed with phrases like anomalous atmospheric propagation and no evidence of malicious intent. Witnesses retired. Some kept their hands over their ears at night. They say the hum never fully left the place. It lives where ice meets air. It waits in frequency bands most instruments ignore. The pattern is simple. It sings familiar things, and sometimes, when the wind is right, someone still answers.